another edition of City Talks, which is an ongoing partnership between City Gallery Wellington and Te Whanganui-a-Tara, the New Zealand Institute of Architects Wellington branch. Just before I hand over to Tina Williams to introduce tonight's speaker, I have the fun task of doing the health and safety. As you are no doubt aware, there are a lot of things going on at Civic Square at the moment, which means that some of our emergency exit routes have changed slightly. So the emergency exit on your left hand at the back of the auditorium is no longer active. So if we need to evacuate the space, just remain calm, stay in your seats, and then in an orderly fashion, we'll be leaving through the two doors that you came through from, turn to your left, head through the two glass doors and out onto Harris Street. And our rally point is the Blue Mat, which is just outside of Nico Cafe on the other side of the building. So with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to hand over to Tina Williams from the Wellington branch to introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you so much.
No mai, haere mai. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, in person and online. We hope you're all keeping warm. To start, I'd like to thank our City Talks partners who helped make all of this possible. To the City Gallery staff who have been working with for nearly 10 years, to Moments Production, working really hard at the back, and to tonight's live streaming partner, Asa Abloy. Thank you so much to you all. You're incredible. So tonight we say, shelter for everyone, fill empty buildings, stop speculation. We're living in a time of great vacancy. The buildings of Wellington are emptying out, left as husks with uncertain futures. How many have you seen today? If you've walked down Taranaki Street, Cuba, Courtney Place, the Terrace, chances are you've seen a few. If you look out the window now, there's another. And soon, this building here will stand unoccupied. The reasons are numerous, but valid or not, the feeling is the same, a feeling of emptiness. Our presenter tonight, Ash Holwell, sees the sharing of spaces as a critical component of a socially just and sustainable future. Their design practice, Spacelamp, over the last 15 years, has been running a small series of experiments in social infrastructures of sharing, community place creation, and sustainable design. In the absence of many civic buildings, their latest work, 257, just over on Willis Street, is beginning to play an intriguing role in Te Whanganui-a-Tara. 3 years in, the climate positive shared space has hosted over 500 organisations, 1,000 events, and given away $230,000 worth of space to those who otherwise could not access it. This asks the question, what happens to a city when we learn how to share? So let's hear it. And everyone, please join me in welcoming Ash.
Tēnā koutou, ko hui mai nei tēnei wā ka teke ka rere te mihi ki ngā mana whenua o te rohi nei. Kia tana ki whānui me Ngāti Tō me Tiatiawa, tēnā koutou. No Sussex me Holwell, o ka tipuna, o Whangārei ahau. Ko pare aka te maunga ko hate te awa ko pihi awari te mārai ko Ash toko ingoa. Is right for me here, standing on these lands, to acknowledge the mana whenua of this land that we're here on today, Taranaki Whānui, Ngāti Tō and Tiatiawa. And I'd also like to acknowledge the mana whenua of Whangārei, Ngāti Wai, Te Parafo and Ngāpuhi, as I was speaking about some spaces in Whangārei today here. And yeah, we're talking about space and getting to spaces and places, and I'd also like to acknowledge all of the displaced people in the world, in Palestine, in Kanaki, in West Papua, in the Congo, and here in the lands that we stand on and inhabit today. When we're talking about access to space, I think it's imperative that we also acknowledge all the people who don't have spaces and don't have places and don't have where they belong accessible to them, and I think that's a thread through some of my work in very tiny kind of ways. And yeah, thank you for hosting. Thank you for everyone who's come out the long way around tonight. It feels poignant to be talking about squatting at the last public event in the City Gallery here tonight. I'll leave that with you guys however you guys want. And switch over to the squat here, which was a squat I lived in the Netherlands, in South Rotterdam in 2009 and 10. We, I guess, was working for pretty low wages at that time and I was up for an adventure, and squatting was available to us in the Netherlands, and so a few doors down, there was another squat, and we climbed up out its roof, and we clambered along over a mosque and over a hotel to the top window here that was boarded up, and we closed up a break-in, and there was a big steel door on the outside here. This was us at 196B, on the door on the right there, and we took the door off. It was impossible to take it off from the outside, but really easy to take it off from the inside, so we took it upstairs, and we made a work table out of it, which was pretty convenient. And we made house peace. It's this really cool part of squatting in the Netherlands, where you have to have a desk, a table, and a bed, and that means you've made house peace, and that means you can call the police on yourselves after that. So we did that, and they came 3 days later. Like, we had a really interesting and smooth kind of squatting experience. We made sure that someone was there 24 hours amongst work and things. There was a watcher at all times during that time. They came in, they took down our names, and they said, "Welcome to the community." The gas was already on, the power was already on. We just had to call up the companies, and we paid for those whilst we're there, but paid no rent. And we were able to do this. This was 2010, just before the law changed to make squatting illegal, because of the fights of so many people for decades, basically. And this was a key moment in the Dutch history of squatting, was the coronation of King Beatrix in 1980. This here's geen woning, geen kroning, which is no houses, no coronation. And so since the 60s, there'd been some big housing crisis throughout Europe in lots of ways. And we know Christiania, the big squat in Denmark and Copenhagen, and throughout those countries, through there, Denmark and Sweden and others, and especially in the Netherlands as well, squatting was kind of a big movement around access to houses. And so in the 70s and 80s, there was big housing crisis. There weren't enough houses, or housing was unable to be accessed, basically, because of high costs and exclusion. And it was a big, that culminated hugely at this moment in 1980. And so this is what one side looked like at the time. These are the squatters who have taken over empty buildings, who have fought for the right to a place to live, otherwise wouldn't have places to live. And this is what the other side looked like. 10,000 police on the streets of Amsterdam this day, and the only time tanks have ever been on the streets of Amsterdam fighting. So this is the army fighting the squatters, fighting the people who were basically just barricading them in their own homes, fighting eviction, fighting for a right to live, fighting for an understanding that you do have a right to a house and a right to a place to live. And it was the work of these thousands and thousands of people in the Netherlands that we were benefiting from when we squatted, because I guess essentially the squatters won, and the Dutch government's response, whilst obviously tanks at some point later in the mid-80s, was to make squatting legal, and that enabled so many buildings to be used in the Netherlands, and it enabled that at a direct kind of squatting level, but it also enabled a secondary kind of opening up of space to reveal itself as well in anti-kraak. So kraak or kraken is squatting, and anti-kraak is to stop squatting. And what it meant was that there was a whole industry popped up that enabled people to rent out their places cheaply with short lease terms to prevent squatters, basically. And I'll talk about more about that later. But there was kind of the buildings, it's almost more buildings were anti-kraak than they were squatted or kraak. So the mechanism of squatting was actually enabled a whole other way of thinking about space for the Netherlands. And so back to ours, this was ours. I think this photo was taken about 2011 after I'd actually moved out. But here on the left, there were more buildings there. And our situation was basically that a housing corporation was slowly buying up the whole block. And so it wasn't worth their while in any way to look after any of the apartments or to do them up, because they knew that they were going to be knocking them down, and they have been knocked down since we lived there. And they were slowly taking buildings away. But here's a mosque that's next to us, and just right next to that was a motel. And part of the protections in the Netherlands and part of the in Europe actually is that you have a fundamental right to a house. So these guys, or the guys that took over our squat were kicked out, they needed to be provided with another place to live. And often that was through the state housing, but that also meant the same for the mosque and for the motel. So these guys protected us for a while, which was really cool, because it's pretty hard to relocate a motel and a mosque. But eventually it was knocked down, and it's a big housing block. But this was just a little bit of an idea of what it was like on the inside. This is Urim. This is Chris in his band setup room. In the time that he was in the squat, his band kind of became one of the bigger bands in the Netherlands. It was like 6 trumpets and him on the drums, and they were just like a mad, wild hit in the Netherlands. But here, this is where he practiced lots of times, and obviously chilled out with a ciggy sometimes as well. And this is, basically what it was like. It was like rough and ridiculous, and sometimes the snow came in the holes in the windows, and there was just stuff and things, and we did, so much stuff to the place to bring it up, but we also had the freedom to do that. I was tearing down maybe 100 years worth of wallpaper at one point to tidy up my bedroom at the time, and just had this realization that all the time that I've been living in Wellington studying, I'd never been able to touch the walls of my place. And here I was, living on the other side of the world, not paying any rent, and suddenly I could make my house my own. And it was another one of the big eureka moments for me in terms of different ways of thinking about property, and knowing that actually how we treat it in New Zealand is kind of only one view as well. And I guess I just want to acknowledge the irony as well. As a privileged white Pākehā, a male, needed to go all the way to the other side of the world to find out about sharing of space and thinking about space in a different way, when also it was right under my nose here in all of the Māori culture that is of this land as well. And sometimes it looked like this as well. It became a big kind of hub. We got given by a guy who I was working with at the time a really good set of speakers. So that was became a big hub. Some of the biggest underground DJs of the Netherlands came and played for random parties and stuff like that. And it became a real hub, and lots of people lived there, and lots of people congregated there, and lots of amazing kind of stuff happened in lots of ways. And this is an artwork that a couple of my friends had done, all that building and no building. And this was really where we were. I think this really relates to a lot of, I guess, the way that I see Aotearoa and how New Zealand's built. Lots of its buildings are spread out, greenfield suburbs where there's so much building, but no actual building of anything, no building of community or connection, or the ways of living and culture and the ways that we work and live together. So this artwork still lives in lots of, I guess, my work and the understandings of things, and I think it's really immensely current. I had moved on and passed on the squat to a friend I studied with in Wellington, and a few other friends, and they kept the building going as long as they could, and then moved on in the Netherlands. And now it's been knocked down. But a bunch of people live through there. You might recognise this work is currently at outside Te Papa. This is Sabine Marcellus's work. She lived in the squat for a while. There was Chris, there was a bunch of people who went on to do amazing things, and it was kind of a hub of art and design and just being able to live and kind of be free at the time, which was a pretty special kind of period of my life, and obviously still influences me in lots of ways. And at the time, in that world, I was working in, I guess, the high art design world for a young designer, and I like to say that I was making chairs that you couldn't sit on and vases you couldn't put things in. And 2 examples here. This is just a welded chair that was beautiful, but you couldn't sit on it, and a beeswax vase that we made there, we made it out of beeswax, and 30,000 bees grew the rest of the vase, which was really a beautiful object and living in its particular world, but also not only could you not put anything in it, Museum van Boingens in Rotterdam took about 10 years to buy one because they needed to get their temperature controls right to know that they could keep it unmelted into perpetuity. So beautiful, but of a particular time and kind of design. A resemblant of this was a wall that we made in Basel for Design Miami Basel, where all the rich and famous came to look at it, and then we just crushed it afterwards. We broke everything up, and it all became waste. And it was really a time where I was reconnecting with some of my ideas around design. And so I would go to these big exhibitions and hang out with old mate Brad and others, and come home and collect furniture from the street and fix it up. So this was a chair that I remade that came like this, because I didn't want to cut the string, because once you cut the string it becomes less useful and you can unwrap it afterwards. And here reupholstering chairs that I found on the street, not wanting to cut the fabric, but just the fabric being in storage whilst it was on the chair, because it's going to still be useful once it moves on from this chair. And some of that will wrap around in my talk when we get to 257. But this is the kind of thing I was thinking about at the time in terms of reuse and sustainability, in terms of the industrial design I was making. And my last project with a designer here was this wild big bee sculpture. This is in Basel at a beekeeper's place that we kept it at for a while whilst the sculpture grew, and we just exhibited it with 30,000 live bees who were cleaning the sculpture as the exhibition went on. But it was also kind of the end of my time with that kind of design world, because it was actually a 1 meter 3D printed model of the designer I worked for as Jesus, and I was kind of moving on from that as being something that was exciting to me in any way. But I do want to, I guess, point out and talk about that period of time, because this was the building in Rotterdam that our design studio was in. We were down this end of the building, and all of this part of the building was anti-squat. So then you see the big new train station in Rotterdam here in the background. And so it wasn't just the tumble-down squats that we were living in the south of Rotterdam that were squatting, that were full of junk and parties. It was also like big buildings right in the centre of the city, and this was anti-kraak. This is what anti-kraak was doing. This was full of young organisations and businesses and startups and designers and law firms and things that were just making their way and creating things in the world. And some of you might recognise, so this building at the bottom here is where Zeus Architects were working, and this is where their Licht Single project grew out from. This is the building from above, and they crowdfunded a huge civic works project in Rotterdam to re-establish the original master plan of Rotterdam that had, yes, cars, trains, biking, and walkways, but apparently the walkways had never actually been built. So in the 2010s, they were working hard at crowdfunding basically civic works from the same building that was anti-kraak and that we were making our artworks from. And I think I just wanted to put that in there, knowing that that's an indication of the power of this type of radical space use. It's not just the buildings that are falling down. It's actually, there's many mechanisms and many reasons why buildings are empty. And it doesn't mean those buildings are necessarily bad or unusable, and there's a totally huge amount of power in all of the spaces and all the things that can happen from those buildings. So in 2012, I moved back to Whangārei, and my family happened to own some property up there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but they had this empty warehouse It was originally built in the 50s as the Four Squares distribution hub for Northland and a supermarket. It had since been obviously the Rima Church, the indoor cricket pavilion, a skating rink and a bunch of other things in its lifetime. And it had also been a big aluminium window business factory. And so when I moved home from overseas, it had been, one part of this warehouse had been empty for the whole time I'd been home, so no one had wanted to use it. And I guess I felt kind of morally obliged to squat it in some sort of way, and also was privileged enough to have access to a space like that. And so at the time I was really into community bike workshops. I'd really gotten involved in one in Vienna when I'd lived there. So I thought that that was kind of like the most exciting thing that I could do. So I made a little map of where our space was and built a double-decker bike to get ourselves into the newspaper and to advertise our community bike workshop. And suddenly we kind of cobbled together a community bike workshop in this space where we just helped people, and it was kind of like a really cool conflux of space, but also reuse of all of the things. We got donated heaps and heaps of bikes that otherwise would have gone to landfill or been melted down in scrap steel. And every week we would let loose on Whangārei a bunch of people, a bunch of young kids who had just fixed up their bikes. They would walk in from some of the poorer areas of the city and race to get a bike fixed in order to ride home together, because if you hadn't fixed your bike yet, then you were going to have to walk home, obviously. But we gave away about 300 bikes in 2 summers that were kind of really humming in the space. And it was a really cool, I guess for me, the beginnings of the experiment number 1 that I can think of as Wood Community Space, which was this. So Whare Bike occupy one small area corner of the warehouse, and lots of other organisations used the space. There was food cooperatives, there's Ovenberg coffee roasters, there was recycling organisations moved in, and in 6 years that we were using the space, about 20 different community organisations used the space. And this is a little bit later on in its life, once we'd done a little bit more building in it, and now a food rescue organisation that I'm involved with uses the space. They used it temporarily and then moved out, and then a couple of years later, once they'd grown a bit more, moved back in, and last year we distributed 700,000 meals out of that space to people who otherwise were going hungry, and food that would have been gone to waste. And so yeah, that was the experiment of a warehouse version of sharing space, and this is what it looks like outside. This is the kiriru of food and abundance that is on the outside of the food rescue organisation. We also have Tautokoro Emergency Housing Trust, a big trades or training organisation in there, giving free trades or pre-trade training to 16 and 17-year-olds. And about a year and a half ago, we opened up the 4th social supermarket in New Zealand in the other corner of the building. And that I guess was the first kind of understanding for me. It was a mix of my own kind of privilege and access to these spaces, and mixing it up with some of kind of the experiences that I'd had in the Netherlands around sharing space and what I'd seen there. And the next one was, at the time, I was part of leading a youth theatre company. This is us on a wrecked van that we borrowed from the wreckers, and I built a kind of bamboo ship on top of, at the Hamilton Gardens Arts Festival, doing a show of the Odyssey. And this is at night time with Odysseus's forlorn wrecked crew just before we pushed it into the river each night as part of the show when his ship sunk. We needed a space to rehearse. In November of 2014, we had a 2-week window where we had someone who was coming over to rehearse with us, and we needed a space. And we couldn't find a space. In Whangārei, actually, we had an empty shop, and we'd gone through so much rigmarole to pay the landlords for the shop. And we were going to pay market rent for 2 weeks, and we worked so hard to find the money and get the funds to pay for this. And then in the end, right almost at the last minute, the landlords were like, oh no, we can't even be bothered. And it was like such a moment of being like, we can't even pay you to use your space. We're so like, that's how inaccessible space is. Thankfully, I happen to know someone who worked at council, and they owned this church. So this was the Methodist church in Whangārei, that when the churches kind of amalgamated in the late 70s, early 80s, became a youth centre. So it was gifted to the council, and this is what it looked like when we first came across it. in essentially a big empty space. And we started to use it in November of 2014, and we turned it immediately into a theatre, and we had an hour-long version of the Pussycat that we made with about 7 or 8 young people. And so in that time we had hundreds of people from Whangārei and hundreds of young people come through to see our show over a couple of weeks. And that was a test for us as well of being like, well, maybe what happens if we could keep this building? Could we step up to not just use it as a rehearsal space, but also to keep it and manage it as a space? And this was the submission we put into the long-term plan. We will create a space for the young and old people of Whangārei to celebrate, challenge, forgive, learn, and reflect in the forms of conversation, performance, art, music, food, sharing, and listening. That didn't get them, so we ran a petition, and then also the council basically decided to sell it, so we put in a tender as well to buy it for $0 was the amount that I put on the tender doc. They came back to us with a bunch of kind of extra requirements because no one had put in a valid tender document, thankfully, and so we submitted again with no extra. We'd done it properly, actually. Probably our number was just the only thing that was wrong, and in the end no one wanted to buy it. So what happened was we had kind of become a bit of a thorn in council's side, but at the same time in the end we're their saviours, and we worked pretty hard. This is Pussycat campaigning with the mayor at the time, Cheryl Mai, at one of our shows, and eventually whilst they gave it to us, we also helped them out of a hard place. They had this building that needed to be used and had been gifted or endowed to the community or the council to use for youth purposes. The youth centre had kind of faded away, and they had wanted to sell it, no one wanted to buy it, and so we kind of also jumped in there at the time to kind of save them in lots of ways. And that was, the end of 2015. So it kind of took us a year of like the first 3 months of testing and doing shows and getting people in there, and then stepping back, giving the keys back for 8 months whilst we kind of petitioned the council in lots of different ways for them to then give us the keys back. And the first thing we did was have a big community dinner. And we invited everyone that had supported us to have kai together, share, talk about what the space, what they would dream of about the space, also to do dress-ups and get photos taken, and obviously do a few ridiculous things like that together. And we also gave them all printouts of this golden ticket. And it was a bit of a contract that we'd had with the people that were coming. It's like, okay, we are a company of giants. It was the name of our theatre company. And we have this space now. You can call on us. We want you to call on us. We have a resource now for you. And in return, we want to be able to call on you for building this community space together. And we started off with a festival. It was kind of just a way for us to pack in and prototype what it could look like and what the space could look like. So this was 2 weeks in February of 2016. And we had, everything from Pecha Kucha that was focused around art community and CBD generation. Urban Dream Brokerage and Learning Space were there from Wellington. At that time there was art exhibitions, burlesque workshops, movie theatre, lots of yoga and dance and other things. Beagle Radio, which was a radio station that would help start, a community radio station, were moving in, and they ran after school live-to-air gigs for kids who just finished school to come in. This was when the first drop-in choir started, and this was a Monday night choir, community choir, with anywhere between 30 to 80 people every week. It started in this festival and it's still running today. It's 10 years later. People coming together, the first time No Lights No Lycra was ever held in Whangārei, and we also obviously threw in the Radio Control Club and a roller disco for good measure. And lots of those events kind of stayed, and it was partly us offering the space, but then also some social kind of infrastructure and support for people to start events that they've been dreaming of, and giving them the encouragement that they can do them. And basically that's what we really found, was that so many people had dreams and had things that they wanted to do, and space was one of the massive blocks and barriers to that. And time again people would come to us and they just had things that they wanted to do, and they were able to do them because we'd made this space available for them. It looks like this now. The council have gone full 360. We used to be their thorn, and now they love us. Last year there was 20,000 visitors to the space in a city that has 50,000 people in it, and 9 world premieres of shows. We have a really great relationship with the Auckland theatre scene, who now often come up, and we've matched them up with the whangara building of a Whangārei audience, and so they come up and often show their shows to us first because our audiences are so engaged and give them such great feedback, and it's also lower risk than opening straight in Auckland, so we've been able to kind of, steal that for Whangārei in lots of ways, and I think outside of whatever it looks like at the moment, this is what it basically looks like in summer, with the people coming through and being incredibly busy and people coming together around things of all ages. And yeah, that same kind of conversation that we dreamed of at the beginning, and I guess we're coming up 10 years since we first got the keys to that building temporarily, and it doesn't look like it's ever going to go back, which is cool. So yeah, that's, I guess, what I'm framing as experiment number 2 at the moment, and onto experiment number 3, which starts all the way back but also has really great foundings in 2015 in Porirua. This is Teaser in Porirua, led by Letting Space in an empty space there. And yeah, my connection with Letting Space has been a big part of this journey, and also my, I guess, reasons to be coming to Wellington. And when I did come to Wellington, I happened to move in with a couple of people who were running Collaborate, which is mental health first aid trainings, and they also ran the Well, a wellbeing gym, and this was a temporary space that they had, I think, for about 18 months on Willis Street. And when I met them, they no longer had a space, and we kind of combined in lots of ways, and they were part of the early dreaming of creating 257 because they also needed a space, and how could we experiment with them around opening up the mental health gym. And I think this is a time, I guess, where I'd like to just also acknowledge that my transition from borrowing buildings and stealing buildings and sneaking into buildings has changed to owning buildings. So I've gone on a 10-year dramatic path of from squatter to landlord. And in that time, that I understand that privilege, and privilege of lots of ways, even to have been able to travel to the Netherlands and be there and be in those spaces. And I think it's always important when we're in these lands to remember, and I don't think we can be reminded enough about the land that we live in, and this is what has happened to it. Yeah. And I'd also like to acknowledge this is my family. This is Colin and Jan and me and my little sister Emma. And yeah, just my parents and their work in terms of what they were able to enable, and that their obviously their work in terms of the buildings that we had in Whangārei, but also the way that they also looked after people who were in their buildings. They often went round in December and gave everyone free rent for December, for Christmas, and they really, really cared for the people who were in their spaces, and gave huge amounts of free rent to charities and things, and were kind of big exemplars for me in terms of being guardians of space, rather than, I guess, the word that I really detest, which is landlord, which I think we need to really update. And that had given the platform for finding this space. So this is 57 Willis Street. Yes, when we took the photo, basically standing on top of Unity Books. You can see the library through here. And this is Willis Street down on this side. And so we were able to buy a floor, 750 square metre floor in the space. And it looked like this when we first got it. It had 27 rooms, 35 doors. Little rabbit warren and an incredibly low suspended ceiling, which is and just really wild colours of lime green and orange, and I think this was one of my favourite rooms, maybe here or here, maybe this one, and it was like hard peach coloured, and all it looked at was a car parking building that was about here. So we went about taking it apart, and part of the reason why I know there's 27 rooms and 35 doors is because we did a really I guess like advanced back of the envelope like itemization of everything in the space. How much glass there was, how much jib there was, how much timber there was going to be. And we salvaged it, so this was a part of our instructions to the salvage crew, or the demolition/salvage crew in the space. And this is what it was looking like at some point. As we were slowly taking the walls away, we did the maths, and it was going to cost more carbon emissions to truck our jib to Auckland to the composting facility there than it was to put in landfill here. So they went to landfill, and the ceiling tiles had glass fibre in them, so they were hard to recycle. But those were two of the major components that went to landfill, and almost everything else we were able to save in the space. Here you can see nogs stacked up, doors stacked up, and all of the electronics, switches and plugs and stuff that we reused, and the doors that we reused as well. This is the framing timber from the doors, from the wall, sorry, and we worked with Rebecca from Design Tree, and these were all made out in Lyell Bay. We worked together on a design that used the doors, obviously on the left there, and the framing timber together to create a desk system for the space. And basically we used all the doors and almost all of the framing timber directly back in the space. And I guess our money also, it didn't go overseas or to imported furniture at that point. It basically, we paid people in Lyell Bay to be able to pay, to build these things and design and work together. And then we bought the materials back. So their carbon mileage is 8 kilometres or something like that, there and back. And this is what it looked like for a while. It was also, messy because of this. There aren't great systems for what we were doing. It was piles of stuff on pallets. But we made lots of shelves out of the old sprinkler pipe there. Reused lots of the electrical components and reused the electrical wiring, which I think was a really cool kind of example of things. Basically, we just pulled it out. The electricians tested it again and put it straight back up. And I thought that this was going to be really annoying for the electricians because of, pulling it out, looking after it, testing it, putting it back in is just like so much more effort than rolling it off a new reel. But they were the ones that were almost most stoked about it because they're the ones that are at the coalface of waste. Like, they're the ones throwing it out all the time. It's not the designers or the architects or the developers or the engineers who are doing any of that. They are the ones that are closest to the actual waste when they're doing things, and they were really stoked with that opportunity for spending more effort but being able to do something that's really fulfilling that they'd been thinking about for so long but hadn't had the chance to do. And we were also able to back to here, we were able to recycle lots of things through basically Facebook Marketplace or Facebook free stuff sites. So I spent lots of time with really interesting characters who were turning up for all sorts of things. There's a bunch of our carpet tiles now in the Nainai pub. The guy turned up one time for some big glass panels, and as we're loading them into his van, I asked him what he's using them for, and he's like, this glass is really hard to come by. I make fish tanks. So a bunch of our glass has gone to Lower Hutt to be turned into fish tanks. And I guess we were working on kind of, $1 million, multi-million-dollar project here in this space, and then also being able to connect directly with people who were coming to pick up free carpet tiles for a spare room in the pub in Nainai, and for who were making livings out of building fish tanks for people. I think that component shouldn't be forgotten in terms of who we were able to interact with, who we were able to tell the story about the space to, and who we were able to invite into the space early on during that kind of construction period. We also did as much design for disassembly as we could. All of our walls are Trans-Tech, so this is normally used on utes and truck backs, but we used it so we could screw it on, we can screw it off. It's super hardy material, we'll be able to use it again, and obviously quite useful to just move around 13 millimeters sometimes as well, if you've got things slightly out of place. This is what it looked like. We collaborated with Jed from X-Frame to be the first crew in Wellington to use him, and did a bunch of building consent support with him for X-Frame to be able to be accredited here. And this was a mural that we had done quite early on, actually, and it was the Dream Girls, Zoe, Miriama and Gina, whose work you'll probably know of from all around the city now, but this was their first ever mural together as a trio. They did a big Cuba-Duper stage, and has obviously done lots of work for the council and everywhere else since this time. All incredible artists in their own right, but an amazing kind of opportunity for us to help them collaborate in a free way. If you know the game Exquisite Corpse, where you kind of draw a head and then put a couple of lines in and fold the paper over, this is how they worked out collaborating together. So you'll be able to see Gina's head and Gina's body and Gina's legs and Miriama's and stuff. So this artwork's called the Exquisite Kaitiaki of our space that are looked over the build and obviously look over us every day. And this is what the space looked like once we'd gotten rid of the 27 rooms. Just one big room. There's the Dream Girls in the background painting, and we used this space actually mid-construction. We had a huge art exhibition in here. We had some gigs in there, and Urban Dream Brokerage relaunched in the space as well, and that was just part of our kind of deep kaupapa of sharing and being able to make use and squeeze as much as we possibly could out of this one project. Another thing that we did in terms of the squeezing, this was our site board, and so we were collaborating with Collaborate. We do a lot of peer support mental health trainings, so we worked with them and we've developed a combo site, so that's a conversation and peer support network and peer support trainings for everyone on site. We trained everyone who was on there and had daily check-ins and a whole kind of mental health first aid process in the space as well, which I think is just really cool, fun, and like really critical part of what we were able to do and what we were enabled to kind of play with once we had the opportunity to. And this is what it looked like about 90% finished on opening day. This is my friend Na opening the space, and a big circle of people who had been supporters of the space coming through to bless the space on the day. We had a bunch of artworks, and this is Ariki Brightwell here explaining some of their artworks in the space. And it looks like this. This is there's Nico and a few other artworks that Nara is looking at here as well. Te Tibble in the middle and Chevron Hassett on the left. Really stoked to have their artworks in the space. We gave the artists a brief of I believe in a world, ... And they came back to us with a bunch of responses to that guide us in our work and in our space. Artists, mainly wahine toa and lots of Indigenous artists who are given a space, a presence in the space to guide kind of everyone who's in there. It also looks like this, and it looks like this. And sometimes it looks like a co-working space as well, and a meeting space. This is one of Ariki's works. Ariki named our meeting rooms and painted the doors of them after the 4 main awa of Wellington, or Te Whanganui-a-Tara, and these are apple and fruit crates we got from the Hawke's Bay. There's thousands of them in there, just kind of sitting in lots that are unused, and we were able to bring them down and use them for our lockers, and they're awesome lockers because people can just take their stuff to their desks and bring them back. Looks corporate sometimes, in some ways, and then it also looks like this very often, and this. This is Manawa Ora, doing bodywork in the space. This is our annual Tūwhiri Awards. We have award ceremonies at the end of the year to celebrate the people in the space and all the work that they've been doing. This is the Vic Hall Ball that they had in the space, and they hired a photo booth and just had the wildest of times. This is Joanna from Camp Boom, who runs markets and workshops in the space. This is Etta Bollinger's book launch of articulations, and we worked really hard to be really accessible. We have hosted the Disabled Arts Theatre Festival for the last few years. The first time they came to us and we hosted the whole festival because we were the most accessible theatre in the city, which we were really stoked and really gutted about, really, that we stoked that we could provide a space and gutted that the myriad of other theatres couldn't provide that space for anyone. And this was just on Saturday night for the Festina Junina, Brazilian dance festival in space. And this is what it looks like. So we've got our 2 dedicated rooms on the top left and top right, and the rest is really flexible open space. There's lots of movable curtains and movable walls. Particularly in the centre section, enables us to really use that space in lots of different ways. And I think lots of my experience of movable walls is that they kind of sit there in their views sometimes, but I think our movable wall moves anywhere between 5 and 10 times a week, shifting the space. And those are basically the different space configurations we have, so it really expands our footprint. We didn't have to have an event space and 4 meeting rooms and a studio space and a huge, big 200-person venue, all of those things could overlap and they could be more time-based than necessarily again and again and again, or building more and more and more. And I think that's a big part of the kind of sustainability and carbon experiment of the space as well, is that we built one space that does many things instead of building seven spaces. And instead we put our resources into people to run them, to move the walls, to set the space up. And that's a much better investment of our time and the way that we go about things and our resources. And we're recently, turned 3 since our opening. When we were 90% finished, we're finished. We had to give everyone June free on our first year open because the air conditioning hadn't been finished. And so it was kind of like a bit of a stunted beginning, but we're getting there in lots of ways. We've provided space to 716 businesses and organisations. About a month ago, we tipped over 1,000 events in the space. We're 1,047 now. And a huge part of, the learnings from squatting and from the spaces in Whangārei, where it was about the learnings were that access to space is just a massive enabler for people and such a barrier for so many dreams and so many things that people want to do for other people. And so we work really hard to have, we have impact discounts of 50% off, and also we give away lots of free space as well to organisations doing really rad things in the world. So far that's about $230,000 worth of free space, and we've provided safe space for almost 250,000 hours people have spent in our space. And I think that's a bit of an abstract kind of number in itself. It doesn't really mean much, but we're recording that because of a few different reasons. We're doing it because this is our annual human hours on the left here over our first 3 years. And this is what's happened to our CO2 equivalent emissions each year. And so our emissions intensity per year has gone massively down. And I think I don't know necessarily where this is going to land, but I think it comes a bit from the understanding that if we were to build the most sustainable building on Earth and no one ever used it, then it's suddenly unsustainable, and wanting to really fold into our understandings of what solar is and great ways of building and all the things like that, and water capture and things, actually it has to be related to use, or else it's not actually related to anything that, we could just build 200 of those buildings and they all have nice stats and they look nice. But if they're unlinked to the way that we're using things, then it doesn't really mean very much. And so this data is approximate. We're doing our best to and it's still, advanced back of the envelope. But it's an experiment. I think it's a really exciting part of the experiment, and we're looking forward to seeing what happens in the next few years as we keep ramping it up. And another reason we're recording those hours is because of this is our hours, and that dotted pink line, we've done some secret shopping for some other office spaces in the city, certainly in our area, and we think that that's about the average. It's about 68 or 64,000 hours a year. And so I guess the experiment with 257 as well is a little bit around being how, rather than building, how are we able to share in order to save those resources and save the carbon that comes out of new buildings, and how are we able to work together, and what else comes from that, instead of building more and more and more and segregating ourselves more and more and more. What happens when we need to share? It's messy and it's hard, I know that, but it's also such a place of learning about connection and being together and culture and developing different systems, and our social technologies is what we put focus into instead of necessarily our materials technologies in that place. And I really believe that that's a really exciting shift that I'd be really stoked to see happen, and it's really cool. I guess I'm pretty excited that we're running some sort of experiment on it here. I know that we're going to be doubling, our current projections are we're doubling our building stock in the world over the next 60 years. And it's the equivalent of building a whole new New York City every 34 days for the next 60 years. And I think that we can't do that. It's not going to fit. And so what we need to do is work out some other ways. Yes, I think we're going to need to be able to do some more sustainable building and some things, but I think that's almost such a small part of the answer. Sharing what we do have is so much bigger and harder and messier and more exciting part of that solution that's going to happen. So that's another reason why we're tracking the hours in the space. And this, of the 600 different organisations, but this is a little like sample into the organisations that use us and call us home in different kind of ways. And I reckon it's really exciting when you've got Ministry for Primary Industries and Koto and Inside Out and Sharesies and School Strike for Climate, where they're based. They do all their pre-volunteer briefings at our place, which is really cool. Climate Liberation, Aotearoa running films there. Te Whakaurua doing lots of their kind of base stuff there as well now. And I think there isn't a space, there aren't many spaces like this in Wellington at the moment when we don't have a town hall, when we don't have a library. So it's nice for us. I mean, yeah, it's pretty exciting for us to be there and be in the space where we are bringing these people together like this. So yeah, that's the 257 experiment. Those were 1, 2 and 3. We're partway through 4 and 5, which look wildly different in Wellington at the moment. And yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for braving the cold this evening and coming out. I'm really stoked to hear any questions you guys might have and chat with you guys afterwards. And yeah, I work under Spacelamp and yeah, really excited about working more with the city and you all. So yeah, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
That was fantastic. I mean, where do I start? Amazing. It's amazing to see how many opportunities there are to engage with, and so much richness and so much building of community and culture. And I think we're really missing a trick here. And I'm so glad that you're doing so well and starting some amazing things. We've got a little bit of time. I'm speechless, but if you guys have some questions, we've got a little bit of time to throw them at Ash. Put your hand up, and we've got a roving mic. Everyone looks like they're speechless. Oh, there's one there.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey Ash,
Kia ora.
do you say you've got future projects coming up that are sort of similar, or can you give us any details about those?
Yeah, I guess one's just a simple co-housing project where we took a house that 2 people were living in it and now 10 people live in it. And another one is, I think 257 does lots of work on mixed thinking, knowing that office spaces are empty in the evenings. So how can we fill it up? How can we fill it up at night, in the mornings, and the weekends and things? And that's kind of commercial. And we have a little space on Taranaki Street where we're doing an experiment of mixing commercial and residential in the same space, knowing that when we're at work during the day, our kitchens are empty and our lounges are empty, and what does it look like when we start to play with mixing those spaces up as well and sharing. So yeah, that's what we're working on at the moment.
Thank you. At the bigger scale, one of the projects through was the need of space to refugees, migrants like in Ukraine and Gaza and North Africa and so on. Have you got any comments about that, those people, and helping them?
Yeah, give their land back. They've already got land. Yeah, like they only don't have land because it's been taken from them. Yeah, and I think that's also, I think there's also an understanding, like as Pākehā here in New Zealand, we've taken, colonised and taken lots of land, but also in the enclosures in England and Britain, lots of land was also taken from people as well. Like land was commonly held in so many different ways, and it was taken like into private and like ownership of just a few in a really, really short period of time. And actually this idea of private ownership and ownership of land by just a few people is really recent and really sudden. So I guess, reminding in that place of giving land back, it's an experiment we've been running for 300 years now. And we've kind of, maybe it's not worked, so maybe we need to try something else. Yeah.
And what are the main behaviours that you think people have to unlearn or change when you come from a mindset of my office, my space, or this is my home, my space, and you move to a sharing mindset? Are there common behavioural quirks that we have to crack open?
I reckon it's really the opposite. I reckon once there's no rules, you just start sharing. Mainly the rules are telling us not to share, not to share, not to share all the time. And so as soon as they're gone, actually what we're much better at doing is just sharing and being with each other. So I think it's really the other, there's not necessarily, in some ways, lots to learn. There's like, once the instructions that we're often told about not sharing and keeping things to ourselves aren't there, then we revert into sharing really easily. Most of the time.
I think it's one more progress too. But two things. One, how do you go all these rules that we have for not sharing, why you council building regulations and things? Do you run afoul of those and do any good ways around it? Because it seems to me that's an awful lot of preventing people just housing themselves in those personal zones. People have pretty limited budgets and they're just $250 for sofas and checking all the compliance and something. And not everyone's got it. Who cares?
Yeah.
All those sorts of things. And there's a huge amount of regulation that goes against what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, I guess we're a polar opposite to squatting in the Netherlands at this point. And yeah, that was a particular period of time. I think there's also an incredible kind of earthquake consideration in Wellington that we didn't necessarily have in the Netherlands. Buildings could be, you know, a bit derelict and also really safe to be in. And so I don't know where we kind of land in that either. I guess in our spaces, in some ways the council not necessarily broke their own rules, but like they did it in this space. They gave us a space that they wouldn't have consented and they wouldn't have allowed in order for us to rebuild it, and they've been chipping away at fixing it for us because it's still a community resource. So in that way it's kind of flipped a little bit. And I guess, yeah, here in Wellington with 257, I guess is kind of our main experience with that was just running through, doing what we could, but I think what we also were able to do is design it in a way that meant that we have walls that are easily taken down and a big open space that allows us our own kind of flexibility, so working within those rules. But yeah, I also get that like building's expensive here, making stuff's expensive, and yeah.
For example, the walls and all that, usually run foul of fire regulations, the fire cells and all that sort of stuff. But you seem to have
Yeah, we just have one big one, which is cool. And curtain, yeah, and fire exits are in it, and we worked around it. So yeah, it was possible. Yeah.
The second question is much more prosaic. Are you still running sort of recycle places like where you sell materials? I'm a shopper at the remaining. And now stuff is also on building sites. I work in construction.
Yeah.
And I'm in trouble all the time.
Good. I mean, not that you're in trouble, but good you're doing it.
What goes out?
Yeah.
New stuff still run with that.
Yeah, I'm not currently directly involved in lots of that, but I guess we have shown some examples of it, and it's not a day today with me at the moment.
So the one you did on 257, that was just particular to that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't run a sideline of building recycling or something?
No.
Really good questions. Thank you everyone
Thank you.
for your engagement. I've got a quick public service announcement. City Talks is going on break in July, but we'll be back in August. We've yet to just figure out where we'll be located, but we'll be back. Woo! Yeah. Who knows? But now please all join me in thanking Ash once more and join us for some kai in the foyer. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you.